Today we're going to talk about Beatles historical events of January 10th throughout the years of their career. Some of the highlights. Some interesting things happened on January 10th.
You know what I like the best? This may sound crazy, but one of my favorite performances, and I think a lot of Beatles out there will agree, Shea Stadium concert, 1965, the first one. On this day in 65, Sid Bernstein phoned Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, and proposed that, hey, why don't you guys play Shea Stadium?
And definitely a historic event that would be. Such a massive show for that time. Only the Beatles could pull off a concert of that size. And it all started on this date, putting it together. You know, another interesting thing that happened on January 10th, earlier for them in 1958, it was an early gig for the Quarrymen. They were a five-piece band.
Okay.
John, Paul, and George, and two of their buddies who unfortunately didn't get to stick around to have fame like them. But it's interesting to hear about these early gigs that the Beatles did. Of course, they're still teenagers, trying to play some gigs, not really making much money, but they have a passion for music. And, you know, they're not even really songwriters yet. They're just, you know, they would have been probably covering Elvis and Buddy Holly, and that kind of thing. That's,
club hoppers,
you know, so that's it.
1971, you probably already know this, but Paul McCartney officially dissolves, or moves to dissolve the Beatles in this day in 1971. And I think Ringo at that time was very upset about it and called Paul a spoiled child or something, which he later apologized for. But kind of a sad day in Beatleland in 1971 for sure because of that.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame, you know, the Beatles were done. Of course, they'd already been technically broken up physically for quite a while, but of course the legal battles make it really messy, and, you know, kind of made them enemies for a long time.
Yeah, I wonder if it would have been just better to come right out and like say in 1969, just say, you know, sorry guys, the band's breaking up, we'll, you know. Would have been better, in your opinion, if that would have happened, or was it better?
Well, if they could agree to it, I mean, sure, it's possible, right? But the thing is, Paul surprised them because Paul was the only one who was trying to keep the band together, and all three of them had quit at different moments out of frustration and anger. Paul thought he could shock them all by just pulling this on them that I've left the band and release a solo album and kind of stick it to them.
But you know, I not to diss the other fellas, but I don't really blame Paul in a way either, because like you just said a moment ago, he tried so hard to keep the band together, to get them back on the road, to keep them as a unit. He must have got fed up and just said, to hell with it. Like, I don't blame him for that, for actually being the one to say, hey, the Beatles are splitting up. I know it made John very upset, but at the same time, it was Paul who kept them together for that last year. I don't think if it was for Paul, I don't think Abbey Road would have ever came together, which was the last Beatles album. Even though Let It Be was released later, Abbey Road was the last Beatle album recorded, and I don't think that would have happened without Paul. I really don't. And so hats off to Mr. McCartney for that, for making that happen. So I don't blame him.
A year after that event, also on January 10th, the Concert for Bangladesh triple album was released on vinyl in England, showing off the historic live concert from mid-1971, of course put together by George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Leon Russell, Ravi Shankar. Actually, one of my favorite moments of the Concert for Bangladesh is when Ravi Shankar is tuning.
Okay.
And then when he's done tuning, the audience all clapped because they thought that was his first song done.
Well, if you don't know Eastern
so,
Indian music, right, it would sound just like, hey, this must be the single in India or something. I don't know. It's you know, but he was very, very talented musician as well, and a good friend of George. Throughout the years, they remained good friends.
Yep, that's right. And Ravi Shankar's daughter Nora Jones went on to become a huge star decades later.
True enough.
So that's quite interesting. Not exactly East Indian influence, but that's okay.
A little bit of good trivia there too. That's interesting. And also, Double Fantasy, I believe it was in 1981, goes platinum on this day.
Yeah, and that was, you know, here we are like 30 3 days after John died.
Yeah.
And the album sales, of course, skyrocketed. And I remember for me personally, the week John died, I went to the record shops, and the Lennon records were they're all gone. And the only thing, of course, they had lots of copies of was Double Fantasy, because that was the new release. So of course they had a bunch of copies, but everything was gone off the racks, because most stores only stocked 1 or 2 copies of the back issues. So the only album that was there was Mind Games. Sadly, I think the only reason that album was there was because it's considered one of his worst albums. So most people just go, "That's not the one I'm going to buy." Interestingly enough, since that was the only one I could buy, I did buy it. And Mind Games is probably my favorite Lennon album.
It's a very good
because
album.
I've been attached to it since the week John died.
Yeah, it's got sentimental value. And there's some good songs. Did you know that Mind Games actually started off as a song called Make Love Not War in 1968, where they recorded it in India? There's a bootleg of that. Instead of going, it's like, make love not war, that's for sure. It's the same as Mind Games. But so John took that song 5 years later and changed Make Love Not War into Mind Games. A little bit of trivia for somebody that doesn't know that. For Beatle fans.
So of course sales were still really high a month after John's death, and yes, he's got all these big sales. Imagine is #1 in England, and even Happy Christmas, due to being the Christmas season, was now the #2 song in England. Give Peace a Chance re-entered the charts at this time, and Starting Over was #1 for its 3rd week of a 5-week run in the United States. On the Billboard Hot 100.
That's right.
Another thing that happened on January 10th in 1977 is Alan Klein had been in a big battle with Apple Records.
Okay.
And they finally, it took till 1977 for them to deal with all of that. So the Beatles already were not recording any Apple Records releases as of 1975, but it took till 1977 on this date for Alan Klein to finally deal with all of that. And it cost Apple $5 million.
Wow. Isn't that something, eh?
So depending on which side you're on, obviously Klein's the bad guy, but it's, it's whatever you do. And John Lennon signed his release from Klein Papers. He had been dealing with Klein for, 7 years or so.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the end of that. So
when did Alan Klein manage the Rolling Stones? That was well before, yes?
I'm not even
sure. It was
sure.
after Andrew Upham, I believe, but before the Beatles. I'm not quite sure on that one, but it's interesting anyway. Yeah, he had his hands in a lot of different things.
And another final fact for January 10th in 1972, John Lennon was having a problem with his visas in the United States, but he had a gig booked with Yoko Ono. And it's kind of odd, but they actually played a concert together on this date, but they weren't allowed to be on the stage, so they performed the concert sitting in the audience.
How would they do that?
I don't know. We're going to have to look for footage of that.
Do you realize if we would have been at that show, we could have been sitting beside them while they were performing?
That's right.
We could
have got on stage.
We could have been on stage.
We could have played for them.
Yeah, and they're actually, you think about how approachable they were at that point. It's like, it's crazy. And that's the beauty of why John loved being in the States so much, because he could basically walk around and do things like that. Not, he probably wouldn't have got away with that in England. I don't know. Who knows?
Hard to say. Different times. Well, that's our highlights for January 10th. So again, we'd like to thank you for watching.
Yes.
And post some comments. Let us know what you think of the show. If you got any interesting tidbits about any of the stories we've talked about. We love to get discussions going because there's so many Beatle fans around the world, and we'd love to hear from you. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Take care, guys. See you tomorrow.
So my dear friends, come back when you can.